The night my husband told me his ex-fiancée was joining us for Christmas dinner, I didn't get angry. I smiled and said, "Of course." I simply matched his hidden card with my own. I made sure her wealthy, formidable new fiancé received an invitation, too. I thought I was setting a stage for a petty, satisfying humiliation. I didn't know. I was lighting the fuse on a bomb that would shatter all four of our lives. By the time the last course was cleared, we weren't just exes and spouses, we were co-conspirators and casualties in a game where the only winning move was to burn the whole table down. The confession came not with a bang, but with a hesitant clink of silverware against bone china. We were in the cathedral-like silence of our dining room, a space I had curated for 6 years to be the picture of refined success. Recessed lighting glowed softly on the polished walnut table, casting our reflections in its dark sheen. Outside, the first true frost of December was etching delicate ferns on the window panes. My husband, Leo, pushed a piece of herb-crusted sea bass around his plate. The movement was uncharacteristically nervous. Leo was a man built on a foundation of calm assurance, or so I had believed. He was a partner at Stratford and Lowe, a corporate law firm where stoicism was currency. The man before me now seemed younger, almost boyish in his discomfort. "Alyssa," he began, finally setting his fork down. His voice was too casual, a studied nonchalance that set every nerve in my body alight. I wanted to talk about Christmas, about the guest list. I took a slow sip of the Sancerre, letting its crisp acidity ground me. I was Alyssa Vance, owner of a boutique interior design firm called Curated Space. My entire professional life was built on reading subtext, the unspoken desires in a client's hesitant glance, the hidden tension in a room's layout. I could read a room. I could certainly read my husband. "The guest list is the same as every year, isn't it?" I said, my tone light. "Your parents, my sister and her kids, the Millers from next door. 20 people, buffet style. I've already ordered the turkey from the organic farm." Yes, of course," he said, waving a hand. "It's just, there might be one more. An old friend. She's going to be in the city over the holidays. Alone." She. The pronoun hung in the air, heavier than the crystal chandelier above us. I didn't need to ask. A cold, clear knowledge seeped into my veins, numbing and clarifying at once. There was only one she who could make Leo Masters, the unflappable litigator, fidget with his linen napkin. "An old friend," I repeated, tilting my head. Would this friend happen to be Isabel? Isabel Reed? The faint pink that flushed up his neck was confirmation enough. Isabel Reed, the painter, the one who existed in the hazy, romanticized photographs from Leo's 20s, a woman with wild, dark curls and paint-splattered jeans, always caught mid-laugh. The one he'd been engaged to for 3 tumultuous years before. She'd left for artists' residency in Berlin and never returned. The ghost in the machine of our marriage. He cleared his throat. "She's back in the States, just for a few months, setting up a new studio. She doesn't really know anyone here anymore." I saw the entire, pathetic fantasy unfurling in his mind. The noble husband, secure in his successful life, offering seasonal charity to the fragile, lonely artist. He would bask in her wide-eyed admiration of our home, our stability, our perfect life. He would get to play the hero to the woman who had once branded him as not enough, all while I, the impeccably dressed wife, played my supporting role. The betrayal wasn't in the ask. It was in the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it. The assumption that I would be a compliant set piece in his little drama of redemption. A strange calm settled over me. It was the same focus I felt when walking into a client's dysfunctional space, seeing not the clutter, but the potential for elegant, ruthless reorganization. I smiled. It was a perfect smile, one I practiced for client presentations. Warm, open, utterly controlled. Isabel, of course. How lovely. It's been, what, Over a decade. We'd be delighted to have her." Leo's entire body sagged with relief. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. His skin was warm, familiar, and in that moment, it felt like a stranger's touch. "Thank you, Alyssa. You're amazing. I knew you'd understand." Oh, I understood. I understood that the foundation of our marriage, which I had painstakingly decorated and maintained, was riddled with termites of nostalgia and regret. I understood that my husband was a sentimental fool. And I understood something else, something that had arrived in my LinkedIn People You May Know feed just for days ago. A profile for Julian Thorne, founder and CEO of Thorne Arbor Ventures, a venture capital firm specializing in disruptive tech. His profile picture showed a man in his late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach them. And in his bio, a single, fascinating line: "Enjoying life in New York with my fiancé." The incredibly talented painter Isabel Reed. The digital world had handed me a weapon. Leo wanted to bring the past to my table. I would bring the present. A present with teeth. "It's Christmas," I said, my voice as smooth as the polished table between us. "A time for reconnection. We'll make it a celebration she never forget." Alyssa's meticulous planning of both the dinner and her secret invitation to Julian Thorne, deepening the portrait of her marriage, scenes highlighting Leo's growing distraction, her own role as the flawless architect of life, and the silent cracks, financial tensions, lack of intimacy. Julian's perspective is introduced. He is not just a wealthy fiancé. He's a strategic, observant man who detects Isabel's vagueness about her plans. Alyssa's email intrigues and alarms him. His acceptance is both a protective move and an investigative one. Isabel's perspective is shown. She is not simply a victim or a schemer. She is adrift, her career stalled, nostalgic for a time when life felt passionate, and subtly manipulated by Leo's attentive, saving grace narrative. The Christmas Eve arrival. Detailed, tense scenes of the four characters circling each other. Julian is not a brute. He is lethally polite, a master of conversational jujitsu. He dissects Leo's career, patronizes his stable choices, and praises Alyssa's controlled environment in a way that highlights its sterility. Alyssa and Julian engage in a subtle, unspoken alliance. They are the two strategists at the table, recognizing each other's intelligence. Shared glances over the wine. Flashbacks are woven in. Leo and Isabel's passionate, chaotic past. Alyssa and Leo's efficient, foundation-building early marriage. Julian and Isabel's glamorous but emotionally cool present. The discovery of a small, damning clue, perhaps a text notification on Leo's phone that Alyssa sees, or a familiar piece of jewelry on Isabel that Julian recognizes as a recent gift from Leo. The after-dinner confrontation escalates beyond verbal barbs. Secret spill. Julian reveals he knows about financial transfers Leo has been making to help Isabel's studio, implying more than charity. Alyssa, pushed to her limit, reveals her own secret, not of infidelity, but of quiet, furious preparation. She produces documents, a consultation with a divorce lawyer, a separate financial account she's been funding. She exposes Leo's emotional betrayal as not just personal, but a breach of their life's contract. Isabel breaks down, not as a femme fatale, but as a confused woman who got caught between two men's projections. She confesses to Julian that nothing physical happened, but the emotional affair was real. The fight is devastating, raw, and leaves all four people exposed. Julian's cold fury, Alyssa's shattered composure, Leo's deflated ego, Isabel's profound shame. The immediate fallout, Julian and Isabel leaving. The silent, broken Christmas day in the ruined house. The pragmatic dissolution, Alyssa's methodical, painful navigation of separation. Leo's collapse into self-pity, then belated realization. An unexpected connection. Julian Thorne reaches out to Alyssa weeks later, not romantically, but with a detached, professional respect. They meet for coffee. To survivors of the same emotional shipwreck, he provides a piece of information about Leo's finances that helps her in the settlement. Alyssa's new beginning. She sells the house, uses the money to expand her firm. The epilogue is not about a new love, but about a hard-won self-possession. She is in her new, light-filled apartment, alone, looking at the city lights. She is no longer the curator of someone else's perfect life. She is the architect of her own. The final line echoes the hook. The table was ashes now, and from the ashes, I finally built something that was truly, unquestionably, my own. The morning after Leo's request, I woke before dawn. The bedroom was still dark. The shape of my husband a familiar mound under the duvet, breathing evenly. I slipped out silently, padding downstairs in my bare feet. The house felt different, not like a home, but like a project site. A problem to be solved. In my home office, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the frost-whitened garden, I opened my laptop. The glow of the screen was the only light. I pulled up Julian Thorne's LinkedIn profile again. His face was all ankles and assessment. A man who looked like he was used to buying and breaking things for a living. His fiancé was a trophy, yes, but one with a chip base. Isabel Reed, the struggling artist. My email to him needed to be a work of art itself. It couldn't sound jealous, or bitter, or like a plea for help. It had to sound like a gracious, slightly amused invitation from one successful person to another. It had to pique his curiosity and appeal to his possessiveness. I wrote and rewrote for an hour, the city slowly lighting up outside my window. Subject: a seasonal connection. Dear Mr. Thorne, I hope this email finds you well amidst the holiday rush. My name is Alyssa Vance. We haven't met, but our lives have recently intersected in a rather charming, small-world fashion. My husband, Leo Masters, was once engaged to your fiancée, Isabel Reed. They've remained distant but fond acquaintances over the years. Learning that Isabel is back in the city and will be spending the holidays alone, Leo naturally extended an invitation for her to join our family Christmas Eve dinner. In the spirit of the season and knowing how it can be to spend the holidays apart from one's partner, I wanted to extend that invitation to you as well. It would be our pleasure to host you both. No one should be poring over spreadsheets or eating takeout on Christmas, even less they want to. It's an eclectic group: family, neighbors, old friends. I think you'd find it interesting. Warmly, Alyssa Vance. Principal, curated space. I attached our address in the prestigious, tree-lined streets of the Old Glen neighborhood. A not-so-subtle credential. I hit send just as the first week. Winter sun glinted off the frozen bird bath in the garden. The hook was cast. His reply came not in an hour, but at 9:17 a.m. precisely, as if he'd waited for the official start of the business day. Alyssa, thank you for your thoughtful and unexpectedly timed note. Isabel had mentioned she might see some old friends, but she omitted the dinner details. How fortunate that she has such considerate friends. I would be delighted to attend. I'll bring something appropriate for the occasion. I've always found the dynamics of old friends to be a fascinating study. Best, Julian. The subtext was a roaring current beneath the polite words. He knew Isabel had been vague. He was coming not for festive cheer, but for the fascinating study. He was a fellow predator, and he'd accepted the invitation to my hunting ground. A thrill, sharp and cold, shot through me. The game was no longer just with Leo. It was with Julian Thorne, too. The 2 weeks that followed were exercise in dual realities. For Leo, I was the magnanimous wife, collaborating on a menu that subtly incorporated Isabel's favorite things: roasted chestnuts in the stuffing, a particular brand of artisan eggnog, little nostalgic landmines I pretended were innocent suggestions. Remember how much she loved your mother's pecan pie recipe? I asked him, as we sat with cookbooks played on the kitchen island. He looked at me, surprised and touched. "You remember that? You mentioned it once," I said, smiling. A lie. I'd found a decade-old email thread between them while organizing his old desktop files years ago, and filed the detail away. A good designer researches her subject. While I played the hostess, I was also conducting a forensic audit of my own life. Leo's late nights at the gym had increased in frequency since October. His phone, which once lay casually on the kitchen counter, now lived in his pocket, screen down. A new passcode, not our anniversary. I hired a discreet, expensive pie. The reports were a dry, devastating litany, long, lingering coffees with Isabel in a bohemian cafe in the West Village. A visit to a potential studio space. His arm around her shoulders in a comforting way. A single, discreet withdrawal of $5,000 from our joint line of credit, labeled client expenses. It wasn't evidence of a physical affair. It was something, in some ways, worse. A reinvestment. He was emotionally and financially refunding his past. Meanwhile, I researched Julian Thorne. His reputation was a blend of admiration and fear. He was a genius at identifying tech trends, but notorious for ruthless exit strategies. In a famous Ford's interview, he'd said, "Sentimentality is the cancer of good business. Clean breaks, transparent accounting. That's how you build something that endures." I read it as a personal manifesto. The final piece of my preparation was more personal. I visited my lawyer, Sandra Chen. I laid out the financial facts. The PI's reports, the impending dinner. "You're setting a trap at Christmas dinner," Sandra asked, her eyebrows nearing her hairline. "I'm introducing reality into a fantasy," I corrected. "I need to know my footing when it collapses." She slid a folder across her polished desk. "Consider this your footing. Preliminary separation agreement based on what you've given me. He's been dissipating marital assets. The judge won't like that." I left her office with the folder in my bag. It felt heavier than a weapon. It was my blueprint for a new life. Christmas Eve dawned brittle and bright. A perfect, picturesque snow began to fall mid-morning, dusting the world in a silent, forgiving white. I oversaw the transformation of our home into a magazine spread of festive warmth. The tree glittered. The air smelled of pine garlands and slowly roasting beef Wellington. It was a stage set for a domestic fairy tale. Leo was a live wire of nervous energy. He changed his shirt 3 times. "Do I look like I'm trying too hard?" he asked, examining himself in the hall mirror. "You look handsome," I said, smoothing the lapel of his navy sweater. I was wearing a column of icy gray silk, elegant, austere, a deliberate contrast to the earthy, artistic vibe I knew Isabel would embody. Just be yourself. That was the whole point, of course. For him to be his true, nostalgic, regretful self. The doorbell chimed at 7 p.m. sharp. Isabel Reed was both exactly and nothing like her photographs. The wild curls were tamed into an artful bun, strands escaping as if by accident. She wore a flowing, embroidered tunic over narrow trousers, and large, silver earrings. She was beautiful in a way that seemed unconcerned with beauty. Her eyes, a warm hazel, immediately found Leo, and a flush of genuine pleasure touched her cheeks. "Leo," she said, her voice softer than I'd imagined. "You haven't aged a day." "Izzy," he breathed, and the old nickname hung in the air like smoke. They embraced. It lasted a second too long. Her hand patting his back was familiar, proprietary. I stepped into the space between them. "Isabel, I'm Alyssa. We're so glad you could come." I offered my hand. She took it, her grip surprisingly firm. Her eyes scanned me quickly, taking in the gray silk, the sharp blonde bob, the minimalist diamond studs. I saw the assessment. The wife. Polished, cold, different. "Your home is impeccable," she said, and I heard the unspoken solace. "Thank you. It's my job to notice details." I smiled. "Let me take your coat." We moved to the living room. The other guests my sister Clara and her family. The elderly Millers provided a buffer of normal chatter. Leo fetched Isabel a drink, remembering her preference for gin and tonic with a specific twist of lime. He hovered. She held court, telling a funny, self-deprecating story about a disastrous gallery showing in Berlin. Leo laughed too loudly, his eyes shining. He was already gone, lost in the memory of a man who found chaos romantic. Then, the doorbell rang again. Leo frowned. "Who's that?" "Everyone's here." I set my champagne flute down with a delicate click. The sound got everyone's attention. Oh, I should have mentioned. I took the liberty of inviting Isabel's fiancé, Julian. It seemed only right. I looked directly at Isabel. I found his profile online. He seemed lovely, and no one should be alone tonight. The color drained from Isabel's face, leaving her freckles stark. Leo's glass froze halfway to his lips. The festive jazz from the speaker suddenly felt tinny and loud. I walked to the door, my heart a hard, steady drum in my chest. I opened it. Julian Thorne stood on the stoop, a monument of black wool and latent power against the swirling snow. He was taller than his pictures suggested, with a physical presence that seemed to swallow the porch light. In one hand, he held 2 bottles of wine. In his eyes, a look of keen, unnerving intelligence. "Alyssa," he said. His voice was a low baritone, devoid of warmth but full of intent. "A pleasure." His gaze slid past me, into the heart of the room, finding Isabel first a quick, icy scan and then Leo, who looked like he'd been struck. He stepped inside, bringing with him a wave of cold air and undeniable tension. I took his coat, feeling the weight and quality of the cashmere. "Julian." Isabel's voice was a squeak. She stood up. "What? How are you here?" "Your gracious hostess thought of me," he said, moving into the room as if he owned it. He shook Leo's limp hand. "Leo, I've heard many stories." The phrase was a grenade with the pin pulled. He then turned to Isabel. He didn't hug her. He placed a firm, possessive hand on the small of her back, leaning in to brush a kiss near her temple. It was less a greeting than a branding. "You should have told me it was a family event, darling. I wouldn't have let you come empty-handed." The air in the room curdled. The Millers exchanged confused glances. My niece stopped mid-bite of a canape. The carefully constructed diorama of casual reunion was shattered. Now, it was a strategic summit in a Cold War. Dinner was served in the dining room. The table was a masterpiece, heirloom china, Georgian silver, cascading arrangements of white amaryllis and cedar. It looked like a still life. It felt like a tribunal. We sat, Leo at the head, me at the foot, Isabel and Julian across from each other in the middle, flanked by other guests who now seemed like bewildered extras. Julian dominated without raising his voice. He turned the conversation to Leo's work. "Corporate law," Julian mused, swirling his Bordeaux. "A fortress of precedent, safe, predictable. You must find it comforting after the startup life with Isabel. All that passion, all that risk." He smiled, a thin slice. "Do you ever miss the volatility?" Leo stiffened. "It was a different time. I prefer building something solid now." "For your family," Julian nodded, his eyes flicking to me. "Admirable. And you, Alyssa, you build atmospheres. Beautiful, controlled environments. It's a talent, making chaos look orderly." He gestured with his glass, encompassing the room. "Isabel's talent is the opposite, of course. She makes order look like beautiful chaos. 2 sides of a coin." "Leo, you must feel quite the connoisseur, having appreciated both." The insult was velvet-wrapped, surgical. Leo's knuckles were white on his fork. I spoke up, my voice calm. "Chaos and order aren't opposites, Julian. They're a continuum. The best design understands the tension between them. It's about knowing what to control and what to set free." I held his gaze, misjudging that balance is usually the fatal flaw. A flicker of something interest, challenge passed behind his eyes. A philosopher of aesthetics. How refreshing. Isabel, trying to deflect. asked a strained question about the amaryllis centerpiece. Julian listened, then said, "Yes. Alyssa has a remarkable eye for the deliberate gesture. Everything here has a purpose, a place. Isabel's studio, as I'm sure Leo has seen, is a glorious testament to creative disarray. Different kinds of power, I suppose. One of control, the other of inspiration." He looked at Leo. "Which do you find more sustaining these days?" Leo. It was masterful. He was painting a portrait. Leo, the man who left vibrant inspiration for sterile control, and was now trying to sneak a taste of the past at his controlled wife's table. Leo became flushed, drinking his wine too quickly. Isabel grew smaller in her chair, picking at her food. The other guests ate in confused silence, sensing a battle but not understanding the war. After dessert, the other guests made polite, hurried exits, sensing the storm. Soon, it was just the four of us in the living room, surrounded by the debris of coffee cups and half-empty brandy snifters. The fire crackled, the only sound in the thick silence. Julian swirled his cognac, studying the amber liquid. "This has been a uniquely enlightening evening," he began, his tone conversational, deadly. "The dynamics are textbook. The secure present, the restless past. The wife who built the stage. The husband who wants to rewrite the play." He looked at Leo. "But there's a plot hole." Leo. "Why did you and Isabel really end?" "She's always been poetic about growing apart. I prefer facts." Leo went very still. "It was a mutual decision. A long time ago." "Was it?" Julian set his glass down. "Because my due diligence, a habit of mine, shows a pattern. Isabel leaves when things get hard, when the money runs dry, when the critique is harsh. She goes where the energy is supportive. The Berlin patron, the Milan collector. Now, the nostalgic lawyer with a guilty conscience and a separate bank account." Isabel gasped. "Julian, that's not the $5,000, Leo," Julian continued, his voice dropping to a terrible, calm register. "The client expense hit an account linked to a rental lease for a warehouse on 11th Street, zoned for commercial art space. Were you her client or her patron?" The room spun. Leo looked like he'd been gut-punched. I felt a cold satisfaction. Julian had done the digging I hadn't yet managed. "It was an investment," Leo stammered, "in her talent." "An investment you hid from your wife," Julian said, turning his piercing gaze to me. "What do you make of that, Alyssa?" "A secret investment in another woman's dream." All eyes were on me. I was no longer the backdrop. I was the witness, the judge, the other betrayed party. I placed my cup on the table. The sound was final. "I think," I said, my voice clear in the suffocating quiet, "that Leo wasn't investing in her talent. He was investing in a feeling. The feeling of being the hero. The man who saves the brilliant, fragile artist. The man who is more than just a boring lawyer with a spreadsheet. For a life." I looked at my husband, seeing the boy hiding in the man's face. "You didn't want her, Leo." "Not really. You wanted to be the person you were when you were with her. You invited her here to show her and yourself that you won. That your safe choice, this life, me, was the prize. You needed her to see it, and you needed her to regret." Leo's face crumpled. "Alyssa, no. I love our life. I love you. You love the idea of the life I built for you," I corrected, a fracture finally appearing in my own calm. "You just wanted to borrow her eyes to see it with fresh admiration." Tears streamed down Isabel's face, but they were tears of shame, not heartbreak. "Leo, you said it was just friends. You said she was fine with it." "He is happy to see you," Julian said, his voice like ground glass. "The question, Isabel, is what were you shopping for? A gallery? A sponsor? Or a softer landing pad?" The final, devastating truth laid bare. She wasn't a temptress. She was an emotional freeloader. He wasn't a rebel. He was a nostalgic fool. We were all pathetic. Isabel stood up, trembling. "I can't. I need to go." Yes, Julian said, rising with fluid grace. We're leaving. He looked at me, and for a moment, the ruthless mask slipped, revealing something like weary respect. Thank you for the dinner, Alyssa. It was brutally clarifying. He took the 2 bottles of Burgundy from the sideboard and handed one to me. This is for you. You have a remarkable palate for truth. He steered a sobbing Isabel out of the room. I didn't move. Leo was a statue of ruin. The silence after the door closed was absolute. The Christmas lights twinkled mockingly on the ruined feast. Leo finally spoke, his voice a ragged whisper. Why would you destroy me like that? I turned from the window. I didn't destroy you, Leo. I stopped you from destroying us. You were living a fantasy with our real money, in our real home. I just made the audience bigger. You invited a shark to do it. No, I said, picking up the bottle of Burgundy. It was heavy, expensive. I invited a mirror. And we all had to look. I walked to the hall closet and pulled out my overnight bag, packed that morning. Where are you going? He asked, panic rising. To the Langham. I'll be back on the 27th to discuss the terms. My lawyer, Sandra Chen, will be in touch. I handed him a business card from my bag. I'd advise you to get your own. A good one. The preliminary filings are already drawn up. The $5,000 secret investment is noted, as is the emotional infidelity. Sandra is excellent with dissipation of assets arguments. The full scope of my preparation hit him. This wasn't a reaction. It was a campaign, and it was over. He had lost. You planned this, he breathed. I responded, I said, walking to the door. Merry Christmas, Leo. The divorce was not swift, but it was decisive. Leo, exposed and disoriented, fought half-heartedly before capitulating. The house was sold. I took my half of the equity, plus a settlement that accounted for his financial secrecy. I moved into a loft in a converted warehouse downtown. The space was raw, full of light and potential. I didn't decorate it immediately. I lived with the emptiness for a while. 6 months later, a courier delivered a small, flat package. Inside, matted and framed, was an original, small-scale architectural drawing of a brutalist tower by the sea. It was powerful, stark, beautiful. On a card, in a bold, precise hand, was written, "Transparency, it turns out, is the ultimate design principle. It reveals the load-bearing walls. And the faults, J. No return address." I hung it on the bare brick wall opposite my new drafting table. A week later, an email arrived from an unfamiliar corporate address. Alyssa, I trust this finds you well. Thorn Arbor is expanding its portfolio into curated experiential spaces, high-end corporate lounges, boutique hotel concepts. Your work at curated space, particularly the Henderson Gallery project, shows a keen understanding of narrative through environment. I have no interest in revisiting the past, but I have a great interest in investing in clear-eyed competence. If you're ever looking for a strategic investor or a client with a challenging brief, my office is open. Best, Julian Thorne. I read it 3 times. It wasn't personal. It was, in its own way, more respectful. It was an acknowledgement from one professional to another. I didn't reply immediately. I looked around my new space, at the blank walls waiting for my direction, at the framed drawing that spoke of strength and uncompromising form. I had gone into that Christmas dinner as a wife defending a lie. I had walked out as a woman armed with the truth, however ugly. And from that truth, I could finally build something authentic, something that could endure. I opened a new document on my computer. The title, Proposal, Thorn Arbor Ventures, Spatial Narrative Design. The feast was over. The work had begun.